Tonight, the tragedy in Paris. How some Catholics believe the blaze that hollowed out the Cathedral of Notre Dame is symbolic of a Catholic decline in Europe.
That some people did something?
And a first-term Muslim congresswoman's remarks have ignited a firestorm. How the president poured gas on that fire.
The standard needs to change.
Plus, the crisis at the border. A new plan to change asylum laws in the U.S.
And how scientific evidence is painting a vivid account of the crucifixion.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Our Lady of Paris still standing tall tonight. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder.
And I'm Amber Strong, filling in for John Jessup, who's traveling.
Well, the Notre Dame Cathedral, a symbol of global Christianity, remains. But what's left after a massive inferno appears to be a blackened shell of a historic monument.
Yeah, that's right. Today, officials are investigating the cause, and CBN News' Ben Kennedy joins us now. Ben, what do detectives think started the actual blaze?
Well, Amber and Jenna, I can tell you prosecutors have ruled out arson and think it's likely to do with a $6 million restoration project. Detectives are looking into whether a construction worker could have accidentally sparked the fire. One of the world's most famous churches, visited by some 13 million each year, will remain as a key symbol of the Paris skyline. That certainly remained in doubt Monday as video captured flames putting the Notre Dame Cathedral's future in question.
You could really smell that it was old wood that was burning and the heat. It
took nearly 500 firefighters 8 hours to get the flames under control. As the fire raged, hundreds gathered to pray.
So now, 3 hours later, it's just sadness and despair.
Now, out of that despair comes hope, as France's president pledged to rebuild.
The worst was avoided, even if the battle has not been completely won. This cathedral, we will rebuild it.
The cross and altar appearing unscathed, while the crown of thorns, said to be worn by Jesus on his crucifixion, was saved, along with the cathedral's primary structure and two main towers. Now, hundreds of millions of dollars have already been pledged for a reconstruction project that could take decades. But back here in D.C., I just spoke with the dean at the Washington National Cathedral, who has also reached out to their sister cathedral offering help.
First iconic photograph of flames shooting out the top of Notre Dame. I had to stop right there and just take a moment for prayer, and it was devastating to see.
Do you feel like many did what you just did, turn to prayer during this time?
I think so. You know, I think there are these buildings, these places in our world that are iconic for lots of different reasons. For many of us, they're iconic spiritually, you know, for what they mean and the history that they hold within them. For others, they're iconic culturally or artistically. And when something happens to one of these incredible structures, we all pause. And as someone who's the dean of a cathedral, of course, it's especially poignant for me as I think about the energy and the love and the work and the dedication and the importance that a cathedral like that has for so many people.
You brought up a good point there. It survived World War II.
Yeah.
It's nearly 900 years old, and then for this to happen. Do you feel like this is going to have an impact on Christians worldwide? Will it bring people together?
For Americans, that and other cathedrals, like Canterbury Cathedral or Chartres Cathedral, you know, they're iconic about ancient Christianity and iconic about the beauty and the traditions of our faith that go back for so long. I mean, you figure Notre Dame's 850 years of history, faith, and tradition in that one building.
The Washington National Cathedral is one of the few globally known Gothic cathedrals, along with the one in Paris. Do you feel like you share a certain bond?
Absolutely. I know, as I said yesterday, as a sister cathedral to Notre Dame, you know, there's many influences and inspiration that places like Notre Dame or Chartres or Canterbury or many other cathedrals, those inspirations are present here in the structure of this building, right? I mean, the beauty of that early Gothic cathedral, of course, heavily influences how we did this cathedral in the 20th century. The difference here, of course, is that because we are a 20th century cathedral, our roof structures are all steel and concrete. There is no wood that holds up the roof of this cathedral, whereas in all the ancient cathedrals, they used entire trees for each slat of the roof. I mean, I think they said something like there's close to almost 60 acres of timber in the roof of Notre Dame.
So were you not surprised to hear it took nearly 12 hours to get the flames under control?
You know, no, it did not surprise me at all. That's the great danger of some of these, of our ancient cathedrals, and why it's so important that we be very careful with them.
The dean told me the Washington National Cathedral is still making repairs from the earthquake a few years back, so they know the impact of having support of the community and fellow cathedrals can have during times like this. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, Washington.
Father Paul Scalia is a Catholic priest and the Diocese of Arlington and the son of the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, and he joins us now. Father Paul, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Notre Dame is one of the most notable symbols of Catholicism in Europe. What does it mean from a historical and from a cultural perspective to see what happened yesterday?
Well, obviously, from a cultural perspective, it's a great loss. There's just so much great art and beauty that was lost in that fire. But you know, it's also a great loss for Catholics, because our whole understanding of a church is, you know, it's not just a building, not just a pretty place, but for us, a sacred place, a place that's been consecrated, that's been dedicated to divine worship. And so the damage there, you know, we can recover from it, of course, and the true church is built of living stones, but that fire, you know, deals a great loss and is a great pain, both culturally and spiritually as well.
People wept in the streets there in Europe yesterday, or in Paris yesterday, but we see people weeping here in the United States. How has this affected Catholics across the country?
I think with that same sadness, because the church is such a great sign and symbol of something sacred and of a sacred calling that we all sort of feel, and it's an embodiment of what we believe. I mean, that's the whole purpose of it, and especially that architectural style and era. That was really sort of the high point. You know, the French Gothic, the high point of architecture in the Catholic Church. It embodies the faith so strongly, and so to see it collapse like that is something that touches every Catholic heart, not just those in France.
Watching the fire hollowing the cathedral, it's hard to dismiss the symbolism. Do you see a symbolism when it comes to that and the decline of Catholicism across Europe?
You know, it's hard not to have that come to mind, isn't it? But some have said, you know, maybe this can be a call to especially the French to return to their roots, which of course are in the Catholic Church. And you know, why do we mourn the loss of that church? Why is it so painful? And it's because it touches something deeper within us. And please God, that can be an occasion for us to return to those more important things, which of course aren't in brick and stone and mortar and wood, but the spiritual truths and the graces that form us.
How does the church? Where do we go from here? How does the church rebuild?
Well, I mean, literally, of course, just to rebuild. And I mean, we've had plenty of fires, and church has been destroyed plenty of times before, and great landmarks and great beautiful cathedrals and basilicas have you know, we've suffered the loss of them before, and now it's really a time of renewal, and I think that's the way it should be viewed. Okay, you know, this damage has been done to the church, and maybe we should take that as a sign of the damage that's been done to the church as Christ's body, and first of all, that spiritual renewal that this calls for, but then also, you know, the physical renewal of rebuilding that church, of you know, returning the divine worship to it. That should be the goal.
Father Paul Scalia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. God bless you now.
Well, to Capitol Hill tonight, a first-term Congresswoman says she is experiencing an increase in death threats following a weekend tweet from the president.
That's right. President Trump's post of an edited video with Muslim Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's remarks has become a lightning rod for Democrats, accusing the president of inciting violence.
They recognize that some people did something.
The tweet heard around the world. President Trump's post of an edited video splicing a Muslim Congresswoman's remarks with images of 9/11.
There is smoke pouring out of the Pentagon.
Is shining a spotlight on a nearly month-old speech.
This is an incitement to violence against Congresswoman Omar, against our fellow Americans who happen to be Muslim.
The president's focus on the first-term representative's remarks is a lightning rod for Democratic candidates.
Friends of mine were killed in those towers.
Cory Booker called the president's tweet crass and disgusting.
From what she said in her speech, she does not deserve the kind of vicious, hate-filled attacks that she's experiencing, threats on her life right now.
Omar's characterization of the Twin Tower attacks came during a speech before a Muslim advocacy group founded in 1994.
CARE was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties.
Speaker Nancy Pelosi seemed to take a veiled jab at the president and Omar's flippancy, stating, quote, "The memory of 9/11 is sacred ground, and any discussion of it must be done with reverence."
I find what her comments to be absolutely disgraceful.
White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders defended the president.
It's a good thing that the president is calling her out for those comments, and the big question is, why aren't Democrats doing it as well?
And President Trump's trip to Minnesota yesterday was a seemingly calculated choice as he looks for 2020 gains. Congresswoman Omar gives voice to a large population of Somali-American Muslims in Minnesota, a state that President Trump narrowly lost in 2016. Well, CBN News Chief Political Analyst David Brody joins us now for more.
So, David, we heard Speaker Pelosi's statement and her response to Trump, but then there was kind of a double-edged sword. So she took a swipe at the president and a swipe at Omar. Why are Democrats so frustrated with Speaker Pelosi's response so far?
Well, first of all, they want her obviously to be more, come to the defense more of Ilhan Omar and AOC and many of the liberal wing of the party. The problem, though, for Pelosi is that she understands where the power is here. And the power is with the centrist to right, or excuse me, centrist to left, center left, Democrats, not the far left, but the energy is with the far left. So the reality of staying in power is center left. The energy is on the far left. And I think that's the difference. I will say this. It's very, very important to understand this. When the Democrats won the midterm elections, basically, when those Trump districts that Trump won between 45 and 55% in 2016, you know, those swing districts, Democrats flipped 27 of those districts. So they understand that that is where the bread is buttered if they're going to win in 2020 as well.
David, one notable Democratic candidate, Kamala Harris, on the topic of Israel, she's kind of taking a different approach, separating herself from the rest of the pack. What do you make of that?
Well, it's a smart move, first of all. I think any Democrat that right now can at least push back a little bit against the far left will do well if and when they make it to the general election. Now, she may not make it, but she's still doing the right, smart thing. And here's why. Look, you know, ultimately, she's opposing the BDS movement that is big on the far left, right? I mean, she's even, I don't want to say embracing AIPAC, but she's not running away from AIPAC. So that's another point of contention. She's also not calling out Benjamin Netanyahu in public like many of these other far left candidates. So she is being able to distance herself, and that would be a good thing if she can figure out a way to kind of parlay that into being that center-left candidate rather than going full to the left. But she's far to the left on a lot of other issues. That's part of the problem for her.
So we got to ask, the long-awaited Mueller report is finally coming. AG Attorney General Barr is expected to release a redacted version, at least, of the special counsel's investigation on Thursday. Talk about a Friday news dump on Thursday night. What are we expecting to find from this, different from that 3 or 4 page summary?
Well, it's going to be interesting because we're going to read the report, we're going to look at it, and we're going to go get to the juicy part, and then redaction. Redaction, redaction. Oh, look, another paragraph. Oh, there's a page of redactions. And so it could be a bit deflating to a degree, especially if you're a critic of this president. Having said this, I think that every Democrat in the country on Thursday will be a Robert Mueller. They will be their own special counsel. They will go through this with a fine-tooth comb and say, Robert Mueller, you got it wrong, and let me explain why. And they will go through all of the dirty little details that they say, of course it was collusion. They're going to find their way. I kind of think of the Minions, you know, Despicable Me and all those yellow minions running around. Everybody, all the Democrats will be minions on Thursday looking for something, talking like this.
Well, you have the president's team also reportedly preparing for this dump with their own report that they're going to release in response. So maybe there's something to that. Are they worried about what's going to come out of this or what people are going to read into it?
I think it's pretty predictable that they're going to have a response, 40 to 50 pages compared to 400 for Mueller. I think there is a cringe factor for this White House. You know, it's going to be one of those, oh, Trump really did this or one of his aides really did that. Doesn't necessarily mean it was illegal, doesn't mean it's impeachment, but there is a bit of a cringe-worthy like, oh, that didn't look quite good here.
Well, David, Democrats have teed up this subpoena power for the full report. Do you think it's likely that they'll actually go ahead and issue that subpoena?
Yeah, more than likely, 100%. Because remember, this is going to be, as you guys know, it's going to be a redacted report. So they're going to want to see it unredacted. And that's where the legal fight will be because they want every nook and cranny, every morsel of information. And if you're not going to get it in the redacted report, they're going to want to see everything. And it's going to go to the Supreme Court. I mean, here's what's going to happen. Jerry Nadler in the House Judiciary Committee is going to say, yes, we want to see it. Barr is going to say no. Congress is going to take the Attorney General to court. And then eventually it'll get to the Supreme Court, and it'll be decided possibly sometime in the 2020 election, or maybe even beyond. Who knows?
Quick question. We got like 30 seconds left.
All right, I'll be quick.
Come on.
I promise.
President Trump, is this good for him? Does he use this going into 2020?
Oh, 100%, because his bottom line is no collusion. So he's just going to say that. As a matter of fact, everybody says Barr's letter, that it was Barr that was saying no collusion. No, it wasn't. It was Robert Mueller. He quoted Robert Mueller in the Barr letter. So Robert Mueller actually said there was no conspiracy or collusion. He actually doesn't say the word collusion. He says no conspiracy by this administration.
All right, well, we're all looking forward to Thursday.
So am I.
David Brody, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, when we come back, a new plan to solve the immigration crisis at the border and what that means for the country's asylum laws. Senator Lindsey Graham says he has a plan to combat the crisis at the border, and it involves an overhaul of the country's asylum laws.
CBN News White House correspondent Ben Kennedy has more.
Senator Lindsey Graham says he's got a plan to combat the crisis at the border, and it involves an overhaul of the country's asylum laws. This as the president continues to call for migrants to be sent to sanctuary cities.
So I'm going to put a legislative package together.
The package would change the law regarding how and when the U.S. grants asylum.
I'll be introducing a package, and hopefully with Democratic support, that will change our asylum laws. 90% of the people who apply for asylum never make it, so the standard needs to change.
The president agrees, tweeting today those illegal immigrants who can no longer be legally held will be subject to Homeland Security given to sanctuary cities and states.
And they want more people in their sanctuary cities, well, we'll give them more people.
But legal questions remain on that move as lawyers at Homeland Security initially shot it down. Democrats criticize it as retribution, although mayors at some so-called sanctuary cities say they're open to the idea. Former ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, added, pick up the phone and call your congressional rep and tell them to get back to D.C. and not leave until they have a solution on immigration reform.
We're never going to stop this by just having walls and troops at the border. We have to change our laws so these people stop coming. There's a narrative in Central America that if you can get to America with a minor child, you will never get deported, and we have to change that storyline.
Now, Graham says his plan will be unveiled to the Senate after the break. The White House says sending migrants to sanctuary cities is not their first choice, but the president likes the idea. If it were to happen, it would put thousands of migrants in cities like Chicago, Denver, and even San Francisco. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, Washington.
When we come back, how science is revealing the details of the agony and suffering of the crucifixion.
In the Bible, Jesus himself said there's no greater love than laying down one's life for another. He followed those words by sacrificing himself for all mankind.
As Paul Strand reports, a doctor's new book provides a detailed medical account of the crucifixion to help us understand what Jesus faced on our behalf.
We Christians all know Jesus died for us on the cross, but a doctor who studied crucifixion for a decade says until you understand what Jesus went through medically, it's hard to fully appreciate just how much he suffered to pay for our sins.
It was the worst form of death that was imaginable. And the Romans had been using it for 3 centuries by the time Jesus came along, so it was well perfected.
Dr. Joseph Bergeron wrote The Crucifixion of Jesus.
Most often on Easter we hear talks about how Jesus suffocated while he was on the cross.
Bergeron, however, says suffocation doesn't gel with the gospel accounts of Jesus talking on the cross.
When you're suffocating and struggling for your last breath, you have no interest in carrying on a conversation.
The real cause of his death first shows up in Christ's own prophetic words at the Last Supper.
Jesus told us how he was going to die. He said, "This is my blood which is poured out for the remission of sins." That's not suffocation. That's bleeding to death. That's shock. That's the complications of shock.
That would be one explanation for the odd occurrence of Jesus sweating blood in the Garden of Gethsemane.
There are very few reported cases, just a handful, and they're always before severe injury, the threat of injury, and usually before execution. So that Jesus sweat drops of blood meant that he fully understood what was about to happen to him.
And then it began. The Jews and Romans bludgeoned and tore his flesh in 2 vicious beatings.
Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin convicted him of blasphemy, which was punishable by death.
But under Roman rule, the Jews had no authority to execute, so they physically and brutally punished him. Then a whole company of Roman soldiers beat Jesus nearly to death.
They were anti-Semitic, and for this person whose charge was basically political insurrection, naming himself the King of the Jews, would have heightened their anger. So his beating exceeded what was typical for crucifixion victims and had extensive blood loss and tissue injury from that.
So the shock set in before he reached Calvary.
It looked like he was beginning to experience shock just walking there because he couldn't carry part of the cross to the crucifixion site. He would have been expected to do that. Everybody else did, but he could not.
Then came just about the most painful and humiliating execution the Romans could administer.
It was considered obscene. A Roman citizen wouldn't even ever be crucified. It was meant for political insurgents, rank criminals, and escaped slaves.
It all punished Jesus' body with shock so traumatic as to kill him hours sooner than most people crucified. Bergeron says shock would stop Christ's blood clotting and kill him in just 6 hours.
This is a very ominous complication, difficult to control even in modern trauma centers. In Jesus' time, there would be no treatment and it would lead to rapid death. And it explains why Jesus died so rapidly.
Rapidly, but horribly, which leaves Bergeron in awe of the sacrifice.
That he would become a human being and come here and do that to rectify our relationship as humans with God, to redefine it and restore us to fellowship with God. It's an amazing thing.
And on that cross, Jesus Christ showed how simple it is to find salvation in him.
It's like the thief on the cross. He didn't know what to say, so just please remember me. And a sincere prayer from anyone is never turned away. And Jesus told him that he would be in paradise that day.
Bergeron realizes it's tough to face all the gory details of Christ's death, but it can make us love and respect all the more a God willing to come down to earth and face such pain and agony so people could be cleansed from their sins and spend eternity with him. Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Thank you, Paul. Great message to send us out.
Amazing on this week especially.
Well, that's going to do it for Faith Nation this evening.
We'll see you tomorrow.